Hi, my name is Kate, and I'm going to be doing a mandated child abuse reporting training for you all, tailored specifically for AIM High staff. And I want to start out by letting you know I have re-recorded this introductory slide several times so far this morning, trying to find a good balance of AIM High enthusiasm and warm and welcoming, while also keeping in mind I am talking about child abuse. So the slides that follow will hopefully prepare you if you do need to make a report this summer. The fact of the matter is the majority of you will not need to use this information this summer. There are sites that do have multiple child abuse reports within one summer, and there are sites that don't have any reports within a summer. This information, however, will be helpful for you if you are going to be working or volunteering in any other settings during the summer or school year that involve youth, because you will be a mandated reporter in all of those settings. I want to point out that mandated means that legally there is obligation for you to report child abuse, but there are also voluntary child abuse reporting options where you can call the child abuse hotline if you are concerned about your neighbors' children, about people that you might see publicly, about friends. So you can make reports as a voluntary reporter. This training is about the fact that you are a mandated reporter. I will also let you know that these slides are available on the Teacher Center, the AIM High Teacher Center, under Professional Development, and then in the folder for Mandated Reporting. There are handouts that go along with this. One handout, actually, it's a two-pager. It has the title of the slide, and it's called the two-pager. And it's something hopefully site directors will get a chance to photocopy and give you so that you can have a paper copy of the most important parts of this presentation if you do need to make a report this summer. Site directors, those are located in the drive under best practices for site directors. And there's the two-pager that you can print out for your staff. I'm going to go into detail now about what is reportable when we're talking about child abuse, what it means to be a reporter. So what must be reported to the authorities are suspicions of the following here in the state of California: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or neglect. And these things are to be reported when the victim or the student is under the age of 18 and the perpetrator is of any age. That's important to keep in mind, that abuse can be caused by older siblings, by other family members, by peers. It doesn't just mean that it's the parent. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, that things are reportable if a child is being abused by someone of any age. And the abuse could have occurred to the victim any time prior to their 18th birthday. What that means is that if a student is reporting to you something that happened 6 years ago, you're still a mandated reporter, even if it happened historically in the past and it hasn't happened since then, as well as obviously current abuse, ongoing abuse, more recent abuse that is also reportable. We're going to talk about physical abuse first, which is any physical injury other than accidental means that is inflicted upon a child by another person. And California law states that corporal punishment, meaning punishment using physical force, is not legal when it involves any objects or leaves any marks on the child's skin or body. So any kinds of belts, any kind of kneeling on rice, any kind of other objects that are used to hit or harm a child or burn, all of that would be corporal punishment that is considered illegal and physical abuse. You may see on a child bruises, burns, bite marks, scrapes, fractures, cuts, and generally as a caring adult at the AIM High program, you would ask students what happened, how they got those injuries on their body. And if their stories seem to change from person to person or don't seem to add up, or they seem very uncomfortable when they're talking to you about it, there might be a time to be more inquisitive about where those marks really came from. Keeping in mind, obviously, that physical abuse may also not be apparent. Those marks may not exist, or the abuse might be historical, or it might be under their clothes. So it doesn't mean that a child has to have one of those things visible for you to suspect there's physical abuse. And a child may disclose physical abuse or any kind of abuse to you in person, but it also might come in the form of writing, a writing assignment or something like that, or a journal assignment. So that's the time you also might want to get more inquisitive and follow up with some more questions in person if things come out in their writing. Sexual abuse comes in two forms. There's sexual assault and sexual exploitation. So sexual assault is the more direct sexual abuse, sex acts with children and molestation, as well as masturbation in front of a child. Sexual exploitation speaks more to the child pornographic industry and the sex trade, child prostitution, and both of these are considered sexual abuse. It's important to note that unfortunately the Bay Area has one of the largest rates of the child sex trade in the US, and that even if young people say that they are consenting to be in the sex trade, it is still illegal, no matter what the age of the participant. So if they are participating in the sex trade with sex acts to young people under the age of 18 and their pimps or their bosses are also under the age of 18, it is still illegal. Some signs of this, of the being involved in the sex trade, might include young people or students talking about being out late at night, being out late at night at parties or on the street. And also a more obvious sign is students who have large amounts of cash with them, maybe $20, $50 bills, flashing that around. That is also another time you want to be more inquisitive about where that money's coming from. Does their family know they have that much cash with them? That kind of thing. So now we've gone over sexual abuse and physical abuse. The other thing I want to say about sexual abuse actually is that in terms of disclosure, sharing the information, many victims do not report it at all, and if they do, it's years later or maybe months later. And it's very common for students and young people who have disclosed sexual abuse in particular, that if once they've disclosed it, they recant, which means they come back on their story and say, no, actually that's not true, or I was making that up, or maybe I was only kidding, or no, that actually didn't happen. So knowing that that could well happen if a child discloses abuse to you of any form, but in particular sexual abuse. But once a child has disclosed the abuse to you, if you get the sense and you are suspicious about it, it is still reportable, even if they have come back on their story and told you that actually it's not true. It is still reportable if you, as a mandated reporter, are still suspicious about it. Some reasons why they might want to come back on their story would be fear of having told the truth about this, feelings of guilt and shame about the abuse and embarrassment, and also a desire not to hurt the perpetrator or to protect them and to protect the family unit. So there are definite reasons why students obviously don't disclose abuse in a lot of cases, or when they do disclose the abuse, that they then want to take it back. Something else that's important to note about sexual abuse is a chart of all the different ages in the state of California and when sexual acts and sexual relationships are legal. For the purposes of AIM High, what's important to note is that any sexual activity, not just intercourse, but any sexual relationship or sexual activity that involves students aged 13 and below is reportable, if it's with a person who's 14 and older. So if it's a 13-year-old and a 13-year-old, it is not reportable. If it is a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, or a 13-year-old and a 24-year-old, it is equally as reportable, regardless of consent. So if that 13-year-old is happily in that sexual relationship, it is still reportable. And I think that's an important thing to note for those of you who are going to be leading discussions about sexual health or reproductive health or safe relationships, healthy relationships, to bring into your conversation these reporting laws about teachers and counselors and people that are going to be coming into contact with in their regular school as well as at AIM High, that this is the law in California, and although you may or may not agree with it, or you may or may not morally be on board with it, it is the law, so that young people can then determine what they want to disclose in these conversations. Okay. Also connected to physical abuse and sexual abuse is intimate partner violence. So California is one of the few states in the country that mandates that reports must be made when there's intimate partner violence. That means young people in a relationship, so boyfriend-girlfriend, boyfriend-boyfriend, girlfriend-girlfriend. If there is abuse going on between adolescents or teenagers, it is still reportable, even though they are peers in a relationship. It is still reportable. I'm going to move on now to emotional abuse. Actually, what I'm seeing is the slide didn't get covered. So I'm going to cover it here. So emotional abuse. Emotional abuse includes abuse that could cause serious behavioral, cognitive, emotional, or mental disorders. So that keyword could means maybe the child is not showing signs right now of any kind of disorders, or that the emotional abuse hasn't impacted them yet that you can see. But again, emotional abuse is reportable. It could include rejection on the behalf of the caregiver, criticism, threats, torture, abnormal domination. So of course, caregivers, parents would like to have some authority over their children, maybe control, dominance, whatever the word might be. But there is a limit to that. So if there is real domination, forcing their children to eat strange things or be isolated or locked in a dark room, or odd and extreme forms of punishment, then that is also could be considered emotional abuse. Children who are exposed to domestic violence are also at risk of impact from that, and that could be considered emotional abuse. It is not always considered emotional abuse, but it is a case where you might want to call the hotline and consult with the workers there. And then for less severe acts such as belittling or cruel words, it sometimes is a hard line to determine what constitutes emotional damage versus a parent at the end of a long day being tired and saying some things that later they might apologize for. What I recommend is always calling to consult with Child Protective Agency, with a Child Protective Agency in your area. You can call and say, I'm not sure if this is reportable, I'd like to consult, and you can tell the facts that you know, and the worker on the other end of the phone will let you know if they think if you should report it or not report it. So you can, as I said, always call and consult if you're unsure of something. For mandated reporters, reporting the concern is the only requirement. It is up to the Child Protective Services Agency to determine if the act in question is emotional abuse or is abuse in general. So again, this is a reminder that as a mandated reporter, you are reporting what you're suspicious of, you're reporting what you're concerned about, and then the agency then follows up with an investigation. You do not need to do the investigation or have evidence. You just need to have some kind of disclosure that a student has shared with you this information. The last form of abuse is neglect. And neglect is the failure of a caregiver to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision for their child. And the neglect could have caused harm to the child or just threatened to cause the child harm to their health or their welfare, their well-being. Meaning, perhaps the child is okay now, they've been sleeping on the street for a week with their parents and they seem to be okay, they seem to still have clothes, they're getting some food, but having no place to sleep and sleeping on the street, or in another situation, not going to the doctor for medical care that they might need, not having food, those are all forms of neglect, even if the harm has not happened yet, that there's risk that harm could happen. That also includes supervision, which is a little bit less of an issue with our AIM High aged children. Generally, young people at AIM High are able to supervise themselves at home for short amounts of time. But if the supervision at home, if they're alone at home overnight or for longer periods of time, or don't seem like they're able to supervise themselves at home, then that is considered neglect. An important note here, obviously, is to think about poverty. Many of you are probably already thinking that. Well, I do have students who don't have adequate food, or they might not have adequate medical care. And there is a fine line between considering a family's issues, socioeconomic issues, and issues of neglect. But there are social workers at the Child Protective Services agencies whose job it is to link families with services that they might need, as for example, food pantries or housing services, give away for clothing services. So again, a caregiver's responsibility is to supply the basic needs of their child, including food, shelter, clothing, medical care, and supervision. So although issues of poverty definitely play into this, and it is a consideration, it doesn't mean that you would not report neglect. Just because a family is poor doesn't mean that a child should be coming to school hungry all the time, that a child should be unsupervised at home, that a child hasn't gone to the doctor or dentist for any needs that they have. So again, those are things to keep in mind, but it doesn't mean that they're not reportable. So now we've gone over what is reportable. I want to just give you a couple tips on how you might respond to a student's disclosure. So when a student feels comfortable enough to share some information with you about something horrible that has happened to them, you want to try not to express panic or shock or, wow, I can't believe that happened, oh my gosh, that's crazy. You want to try to remain as calm as possible after they have disclosed the information with you. You want to be a strong sounding board and a presence for that young person. You might want to ask clarifying questions, but you don't need to do an investigation. You want to express belief that the student's telling you the truth, even if it's a student who tends to make up stories from time to time, or maybe their affect seems a little bit silly and you're not sure if they're being serious. When it comes to discussions around abuse, you want to let the child know or express that you believe they're telling you the truth. And you also want to reassure them that it's a good thing that they told you. Again, some students say, oh, I shouldn't have said that, oh no, and students, again, in middle school often do know the reporting laws. But you want to reinforce that it is good that they shared what happened to them and that it was not their fault. Whatever abuse happened is not their fault and that they're not a bad child or a bad person. You also might want to let the students know that you will be talking to the site directors, and do not promise to keep the information a secret. This is really critical and is sometimes a trap that our younger educators fallen into, is that a student might say, oh, can I tell you something but promise not to tell anyone? I wouldn't say yes to that. It might be information that is really not important. It might be a piece of gossip that they share with you. But if it is something about abuse and you do need to disclose it and report it, then you've given a promise that you can't keep. So I would recommend not promising that you won't share information with students' information with anyone. And again, I would let the students know if you think you're going to make a report that you're going to need to consult with site directors around it. So those are some tips on how you might respond when a student has disclosed to you. How do you make a child abuse report? So, what information do you need from a student? As much of this as you can get, again, you are not doing an investigation, but you can be curious and you can ask follow-up questions. You can also ask some of these questions later on in the day or even the next day. If a child has reported something to you or shared something with you, and in the moment you kind of were taken off guard and you weren't sure how to handle it, and in consultation with another teacher or a site director, or in just kind of going home for the afternoon and thinking, wait, that didn't make sense. I need to know a little bit more about that. You can always go back to the student and say, you know, that conversation we had yesterday, I have some more questions. I'm a little bit worried about what you shared. So again, all this information that you might want to get from a student, you might not get the first go round, and it's okay to go back to a student and follow up with a conversation. So when you're making a report, the agencies will want to know who the alleged perpetrator is, when the last occurrence of abuse was, and where it happened. Abuse is reportable if it's in this country or in another country, so it's still reportable no matter where it happened. You also would be helping the agency if you found out if the child has ever told anyone else. Do they still see the perpetrator? If their parents know about it, and if their parents have taken any steps to try to protect their child from this kind of abuse that has happened or is happening. You want to know where the student is staying that night. This is important if a student has more than one home, if they stay with grandma sometimes and mom sometimes and dad sometimes. You'd want to know where they're going home to in case the Child Protective Services workers went out to interview them in the evening. They would need to know which address to go to find them. And also, when a child has shared that when there's current abuse going on, I always want to know if they feel safe going home that day. And if they don't feel safe going home, that's an automatic report that I would do immediately. Okay. You're going to report when a student shares something that can be considered abuse, given those 4 categories I shared earlier. If you suspect it, report it. As soon as possible, but within 24 hours of disclosure is the law. If there is current abuse of the child, so again, if the child said this happened 6 years ago, that is reportable within 24 hours. but you don't need to stop your class and go and make that report immediately. If the abuse is ongoing and current, and or if there are visible marks from the abuse on the child, and or if they're afraid to go home, if any of those things are true, then that report should be made while the child is still physically in the program. So if a child reports something to you during your advising class and you have 2 more academic classes to teach, and then you're on lunch duty, and then you're teaching 2 activities in the afternoon, you're going to need to find someone to consult with your directors. They will find coverage for you while you make that child abuse report. The reason for that is the agency workers might want to come out immediately to interview the child, and it's better for them to know that the child is at the school setting or at the site so that they can find them there. Again, so if it seems like a critical thing that the CPS is going to come out immediately and do some interviewing, you would want to make that report as soon as possible, for sure. The issue around the visible marks, I just want to note, is that those marks, bruises, cuts will over time, over a few days, start fading, and so if the workers want to take pictures of that or use that as evidence, then that's why it's also important to have the workers see those marks on the child. Who makes the report? So if you are listening to this, you make the report. You are a mandated reporter. All summer program employees and volunteers and interns are mandated reporters, no matter of your age. So you might be a 16-year-old high school intern working in a 9th grade class, and you have someone who's just about to turn 15 and they have reported sexual abuse to you. You as a mandated reporter, even though you are of similar age, you are the mandated reporter and must make that report. Just telling your lead teacher or the site director or any other person, just sharing that information and saying, hey, they told me this, can you make the report? That is not adequate. The individual that was first made aware of the abuse must make the report. If 2 of you heard about the abuse at the same time, then you can agree that one of you will make the report. So you don't need to make 2 identical reports of abuse that if you heard about it at the same time. When you make a child abuse report, you would make a verbal report within 24 hours by phone, and at the end of these slides I have the numbers for each county where you would make that report. And then you fax a written report within 36 hours. So when you make the phone call, the worker on the other end of the phone will generally give you a website or let you know how to access an online PDF form that you will type in the information that you have given them verbally. You will then type it into this form, and you will print it out and have to fax it to them. They'll give you a fax number as well. For the address part of that form, the reporter's address, I recommend you use the Aim High Central Office address here on Harrison Street. And when you make that report, you are going to need help from the site directors to get the child's home address, their date of birth, their ethnicity, and their home language. And those things are all available on the database, on the student database. Some people wonder if they should tell the child or family that they have made a report. And this is a personal decision. Again, child abuse reporting is mandated to do, but you do not have to share that you have made a report. There's no legal obligation to tell the child or tell their family. There are a couple cases which it could be beneficial to disclose that you have made the report. These include that the abuse of the minors by someone who's not a caregiver. So I might let a parent know if a child has told me that an uncle or a family friend has been abusing them. I would make the call to mom or dad or whoever the caregiver is to let them know that that was shared with me and that I have reported it to Child Protective Services. When the minor is aware that you might be making a report and has asked you, so again, once kids get to middle school, many of them have a sense of what the laws are and what adults might, or not even adults, but what school employees and volunteers would have to report. And so they might ask you, did you report that, or do you have to report that, or what are you going to do with that information? And you could just try to avoid that conversation or say, I don't want to talk about that, or I don't feel comfortable letting you know. But I wouldn't recommend lying and saying, no, I didn't do a report. I would either try to avoid the conversation, or I would recommend saying, you know what, legally I had to make a report. I'm a mandated reporter. If you think your relationship with a student would benefit from their openness, it's also a time when you might let them know. Again, even if it is a family member who is a perpetrator of the alleged abuse, sometimes I have let families know I had to make a report, and I've shared with them what the laws are around corporal punishment. Not all families do know the laws, not all, especially immigrant families, might not know what the laws are in this country. And even though I've already made the report, I have also done some education with families around what the laws are in this country, and also trying to find that family some support if they're under a great deal of stress or whatever's happening to be part of the cause of the abuse. So there are situations in which you might want to share information about a report, but again, you are not under legal obligation to do so because child abuse reports are confidential. So when you make your report, you are mandated, you do give your name to the reporting agency, but your name, your identity is kept confidential and would only be disclosed between Child Protective Service agencies, to the district attorney, to the child's attorney, and also if there's a court order, or if you were subpoenaed to go and discuss it in court. But other than those reasons, a reporter's name is kept confidential. That doesn't mean that a family, if they get investigated for abuse, or a person, if they get investigated for abuse, couldn't deduct or couldn't figure out that their child had told someone at Aim High, and that's why the report got made. So a family or a child may be able to figure out that it was you, but again, the agency would not give your name out to a family. Failure to report, so this means as a mandated reporter, if you learn of abuse and you do not report it, it is considered a misdemeanor and it's punishable with jail time or a financial fine. It could also be subject to a civil lawsuit and found liable for damages. So that would occur if a child's abuse came to light and the child shared that they had told a teacher at Aim High about this and that teacher hadn't reported or hadn't done anything, that you could be held liable for it. I also want to point out here that no supervisor or administrator or coworker can impede you making a report or punish you for making a report. So I don't think this would happen at Aim High, but if a site director said, you know what, I don't want you making a report against that family, they're like a big supporter of Aim High, and that would really create a problem if you reported, that you are still, as a mandated reporter, need to make that report. So a supervisor cannot punish you or get in the way of you making a report legally. Child abuse hotlines by county. So here are the numbers for each hotline according to county, and I've put all of the Aim High sites. All of the counties are up here. This is on the 2-pager that you should get. It's also very accessible online by Googling, but if you want to note these numbers down or put one in your phone, depending on what campus you're at. I want to point out here that you make a report based on the location of your campus. Regardless of where the student lives or where the suspected abuse occurred, the reports are made based on where the disclosure happened. So if you are working in the San Francisco campus and the child commutes in from the East Bay and the abuse happened in Oregon, you still report to San Francisco even though the child lives in another county and the abuse happened in another state. You report wherever the abuse was disclosed, okay? So you would report to whichever county your Aim High campus is located. After you report, the agency will make their own determination as if they're going to investigate or if they will just keep the report on file. If they do choose to investigate, they might choose to interview the child at the Aim High site or at the school site, in which case the worker will come to the site prepared with a form that shows that they either have parent permission to speak to the child or they've gotten a court order saying they don't need parent permission. So this is a relatively new law stating that Child Protective Service agency workers do need to have parent permission to interview a child about child abuse, or a judge has to sign off and say they do not need that parent permission. So the worker, the social worker, should be able to show you a signed piece of paper saying they have one of those two things. You do not need to further explore that. You do not need to double check with a parent. You do not need to double check with a judge. but the worker should be able to show you that piece of paper if they're going to interview a child at Aim High. If the agency decides not to investigate, the report is still kept on file, and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we're reporting and thinking, well, I don't know, this abuse isn't that big a deal, it doesn't seem to have impacted the kid that much, I don't think CPS will really do anything, maybe it's not worth my time to report it. First and foremost, you are a mandated reporter, and legally, yes, you must make the report. The second thing is that maybe it's not one report, but maybe it's the 12th or 13th report on the same perpetrator, and the agency will say, you know what, we've got all these things leading up to this, now it's time, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, as they say, and let's go and investigate this person or investigate this abuse. So again, the information is still kept on file, it's still a paper trail that could come back in the future to serve to protect that child or that family. Once CPS has determined what they're going to do, they will mail a letter, and that letter will come to the central office, as I'm asking you to use the central office address. So you probably won't see it because it takes a couple weeks to generate that letter once a report's been made, but the agency will determine if the allegations are inconclusive, if they're unfounded, or they're substantiated. If they're substantiated, that means that then they will open a case and there will be social workers involved in that child. It does not mean that the child will automatically be removed. Removal is a very extreme process and does not happen in a majority of CPS cases. So sometimes there's a stereotype, the second you call CPS, the social worker's there and removes the child, and that is definitely not true. It varies from county to county. But agencies take very seriously trying to keep children with their families. Families may be offered supports while they still maintain custody of their children at the same time. So just know that you making a report will not automatically lead to a child losing their family. There's also unfounded and inconclusive. So unfounded means that they have gone out to investigate and they were not able to determine that child abuse happened, so that's unfounded. And then inconclusive means that the information given did not lead them to a conclusion that it was abuse, so they did not go and do an investigation. Again, every report does not lead to an investigation. After you make the report, it's also, I want to note that that paper that you fax to Child Protective Services, you will have that hard copy, and that should go to the director. And directors, you should have a folder in your COD box that you create once the first report has been made, the child abuse report. Once you have one report, make a folder that says mandated child abuse or child abuse reporting, and put that in there, and that can get returned to the central office and filed here. You don't want to be using your personal address for any of that, any of those letters, and so the documentation should stay with the site directors in the COD box. If you're not sure you should make a report, you can always consult with your site directors, you can consult with your student support specialist if you have one, and then again, as I've said, you can call the agency and consult. You can say, I'm not sure, let me tell you what's going on, let me consult, and then they will let you know if they think recommend you should go forward and make a report or not. But if you're not sure to report, definitely consult with someone. So that's the information for today. The next few slides have some true or false questions, kind of a test to see if you are paying attention and what you got out of this. So if you have time as a site, I'm going to go over them. It's about 10 more minutes, and if you have time, this is a good way to summarize your learning from the day. Okay, so here we go. Let's see who was listening. You know, before I start, I'm actually just going to pause for a second and ask you, I'm going to go back so that you don't, there we go. I'm going to ask you, if you're in the room and you have made a child abuse report, would you raise your hand so that other people can see who you are? Okay, so looking around the room, you can put your hands down now. Those are the people who you might go to consult with. Those are people who have at least made one report. So if you're new to reporting and you're feeling a little bit unsure about it, those people who just raised their hands would be people you might lean on for support if you are making a child abuse report this summer. Okay? Okay, here we go. True or false? I set up here in your teaching team, so why don't we just say the people sitting around you in groups of 2 or 3, you can determine if these things are true or false. I'll read them out loud one by one. Number 1. Bisha tells her activities teacher that her cousin used to touch her down there whenever she used to stay at her aunt's house. She hasn't stayed there or seen him in over 2 years, so the teacher does not need to report the abuse. Is that true or false? Discuss amongst your people around you. We've got about 15 seconds. And if we could have you come back together on 3, back together on 2, everyone quiet on 1. And the answer to this one is false. The teacher does need to make a report. This is historic abuse. Although it has already happened, it still needs to be reported. It is reportable sexual abuse. Number 2, Juan tells his teacher that he hates his stepdad. He says he's super mean and just acts weird. This could mean that Juan is being physically abused and his teacher should report it within 24 hours. Is that true or is that false? Discuss with the people around you. And if you can hear my voice, follow my clap. If you can hear my voice, follow my clap. Okay, this is false. What I would recommend here is that the teacher have some follow-up questions, that the teacher get curious about what it means that his stepdad is super mean and that he acts weird. But those statements alone would not constitute a report for abuse. Number 3, Destiny, a 13-year-old in 7th grade, is crazy about her boyfriend. She wears a bracelet with his name on it and tells the high school issues and choices intern all about how sweet he is to her and buys her lots of gifts. She says he's in college, so she doesn't get to see him all that often. Then during the unit on sexual health, the intern is running a group, and Destiny openly shares that she and her boyfriend always use condoms when they have sex. As their relationship is consensual, and the intern is only in high school, this is not reportable. Is that true or false? Call out the answer now. Okay, the answer is false. A consensual sexual relationship between a 13-year-old and a college student is reportable as sexual abuse. Again, a 13-year-old involved in any sexual conduct with anyone over the age of 13 is reportable. Plus, the fact that the high school intern is still in high school and might only be 16 or 17 years old is irrelevant. If you are a volunteer or an intern at Aim High, you are a mandated reporter, regardless of your age. Next set, true or false. Here we go. Number 4. Roger shares that his uncle gets drunk a lot and sometimes gets really violent. When the college intern who's teaching a soccer activity asks him what he means, he says, well, he hits me and my sister if we don't go to the store and get him more beer. In this case, some appropriate follow-up questions would be, where and how does he hit you? Does he do other drugs? When he's not drunk, is he nice? Is he your mom's brother or your dad's brother? Has it left bruises? How often does it happen? When was the last time it happened? Does he live with you? And is he married? So the correct answer here is it's a trick question. Some of those are appropriate follow-up questions and some of those are not. The ones that are not appropriate are, is he married? That is irrelevant to the story. What other drugs does he use is also irrelevant to the abuse. When he's not drunk, is he nice? That does not make up for it, so that is irrelevant as well. The question, is he your mom's brother, your dad's brother? The only way that's relevant is for identifying which uncle it might be in the family, but a more direct question would be, what is your uncle's name? The other questions are appropriate follow-up questions to determine if this might be a reportable situation. Number 5. Lorena often comes to school really tired and shows off to her girlfriends that she stays out past 1 or 2 in the morning whenever she wants to. She's often also seen flashing $20 and $50 bills around at lunchtime, and she doesn't mention any sexual activity in her issues and choices discussions. It is not legally required, but a teacher with a good relationship to her might ask her where she gets all her money and what she does out so late at night, as this is possibly a case of neglect. Sorry about those typos there. Is that true or false? Discuss amongst your peers. And eyes up here on 2, eyes up here on 1, eyes up here, and discussion's over now. Thank you. So this is true. This in itself is not reportable. However, some follow-up questions would be appropriate, in particular about the money and also what she's doing so late at night. It could be a situation of neglect in terms of not having supervision, people not knowing where she is. It also sounds like it could be a situation where there's sexual exploitation going on, which is considered sexual abuse. Again, it's not clear, so some follow-up questions would be appropriate before making a report. We have one more slide of some true or false situations. Number 6, Donna is a master teacher and is concerned that one of her 6th grade students is always hungry. Says there's never any food at home and that he takes care of his 4 younger siblings while his mom and dad are out all night. He thinks they're working when they're not home. Most recently, he is complaining of a toothache, and when he shows her his gum, it's very inflamed and seems infected. Donna should call the child abuse hotline to either consult about this case or to make a report, as it could be neglect. So call out your answer, true or false. Is it true or false now? It is true, yes. Donna should definitely call the abuse hotline to consult. It seems like it could be neglect, even though the parents might be out at work late working. If it is a 6th grade student supervising 4 younger siblings overnight, that would not be appropriate. That would be considered neglect of those younger siblings as well. And it also sounds like there's some medical neglect going on as well. So that would definitely be a consultation, if not a direct report. Number 7, Leilani is the academic coordinator at her site. In working with a student named Pat, he shares a story of physical abuse involving his mom's ex-boyfriend, burning him with cigarettes, and also shows her several scars. He says the stepfather did the same thing to his mom, and his mom finally left that crazy dude. As Pat talks, he is smiling and doesn't seem to be upset about it. Leilani doesn't need to report physical abuse because it happened some years ago and his mom has a new boyfriend now. True or false? Discuss with your friends and your peers around you. You can hear my voice, follow my clap. You can hear my voice, follow my clap. Thank you. So this is still reportable. Being burnt with a cigarette is physical abuse, and even though it happened historically, it is still something to report. Even though Pat's mom is not still with this man, and so he is not at risk of being abused by him, Pat could still be held accountable, and also Pat might be around other children that he could currently be abusing. So yes, that is reportable. Lastly, we have a final scenario. Erica is a site director and decides not to make a report about abuse because she is scared of the father. He's already been aggressive with program staff at the family orientation. If she makes a child abuse report, the parents will be notified it was her who made it. So Erica is concerned, right? She's worried about this father. But that does not mean that she is allowed to then not make a report. She's still a mandated reporter. And again, the agency will not be sharing her name or her information with the family about being a reporter, so she still must make that report. And that is all we have. Thank you very much for your attention and your participation today. I apologize if this was a little dry. It was hard to think how to jazz up a mandated abuse presentation. And again, the information you have here hopefully you will not need to use this summer, but it may come in handy in the future or as you consult with colleagues as well. Thanks so much and have a great summer.